Poor Orphan agreed to a secret wedding with a stranger, only to discover he's a billionaire. The dense fog of the countryside shrouded the old wooden chapel, making its shadowy silhouette barely discernible against the darkening sky. Sophia's hands trembled as she clutched the worn invitation that had led her to this place, a secret wedding to a man she had never met. The promise of escaping her poverty had been too compelling to ignore, but now, standing at the threshold of her new reality, doubt gnawed at her resolve. A gust of cold wind swept through the air as the heavy wooden doors creaked open. Her heart pounded like a drum as a figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, imposing, and cloaked in a tailored black suit, his face was veiled in shadow. His voice, deep and calm, sent chills through her. "Mississippi Sophia Lane, I presume?" She nodded, unable to form words. "You've made the right choice by coming here," he continued, his tone both reassuring and cryptic. "But I must warn you, my world is unlike anything you've ever known." As he extended his hand to her, Sophia hesitated, the gravity of her decision pressing heavily on her chest. Little did she know, she wasn't stepping into a marriage, she was stepping into a web of secrets, deceit, and unimaginable fortune. Sophia Lane had lived her entire 22 years in the shadow of hardship. Growing up in the tiny village of Everdale, she knew nothing but the calloused hands of laborers and the frigid nights of a poorly insulated attic room. After her parents' untimely deaths in a factory accident, she became a seamstress, sewing intricate patterns onto fabric for wages that barely kept her alive. Yet, amidst the hunger and struggle, Sophia clung to a fierce determination to escape the oppressive weight of poverty. Everdale whispered secrets, and when a mysterious man arrived in town with a proposition, the whispers turned into a roar. Dressed in finery that no villager could afford, he handed Sophia an envelope sealed with crimson wax. Inside, a single piece of paper bore a succinct message. "A chance at a life beyond your imagination awaits. Come to Blackwood Chapel at dusk on the 15th, accept this marriage, and your future will be secured." The villagers speculated wildly, a hidden prince, a foreign nobleman, or perhaps even something more sinister. But the promise of salvation from her dire circumstances was a temptation Sophia couldn't resist. The envelope also contained money, enough to provide her with new clothes and a carriage to the mysterious chapel. The days leading up to the 15th were a whirlwind of anxiety and hope. What kind of man would make such an offer, and why her? When she asked the man who delivered the message, he merely tipped his hat and vanished into the night. The little voice in her mind that urged caution was drowned out by the louder one that dreamed of silk dresses, roaring fireplaces, and a full belly. By the time the carriage arrived to take her to Blackwood Chapel, Sophia was resolute. Whether the man awaiting her was a savior or a scoundrel, she would face him. After all, wasn't a life of uncertainty better than one of unending struggle? The sound of the carriage wheels crunching over gravel broke the silence of the evening. Sophia peered through the window, her breath fogging the glass as the shadowy outline of Blackwood Chapel came into view. It stood like a sentinel against the fading light, its tall spire piercing the sky. The sight sent a shiver through her, but she straightened her back, determined not to let fear overtake her. The driver, a silent, somber man, opened the carriage door and extended a gloved hand. Sophia stepped down, clutching her small satchel tightly. She dressed carefully for the occasion in the finest garment she owned, a modest navy dress that hinted at her beauty despite its simplicity. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached the heavy oak doors of the chapel. They creaked open on their own, revealing a dimly lit interior. Candles flickered along the walls, casting shadows that danced like specters. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax. Sophia's footsteps echoed as she walked down the aisle, her shoes clicking against the worn stone floor. At the far end of the chapel stood a man, tall and commanding. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and his sharp features were partially obscured by the low light. He wore a tailored black suit that clung to his frame, exuding wealth and power. As she approached, he turned to face her fully, his piercing gray eyes locking onto hers. Mississippi Lane, he said, his voice low and smooth. You came. Sophia stopped a few feet away, clutching her hands tightly in front of her to still their trembling. I did, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Are you the one who sent the letter? Indeed. My name is Alaric Blackwood, he said, offering her a slight bow. And I am the man who will be your husband. The words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on Sophia. This was it, the moment that would determine the course of her life. She swallowed hard, her mind racing with questions she didn't dare ask aloud. Why had he chosen her? What did he want in return? Before you agree, Alaric continued, his tone growing serious, you must understand. This union will bind you not only to me but to my world, a world of privilege, yes, but also danger and secrecy. If you accept, there will be no turning back. Sophia's breath caught. She studied him, searching his expression for deceit, but found none. Only intensity and a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Determined to rise above her fear, she squared her shoulders. I accept, she said, her voice firm. Alaric's lips curled into a faint smile. Then let us begin. The ceremony that bound Sophia to Alaric was as enigmatic as the man himself. The officiant, an elderly figure with a solemn demeanor, spoke in a language unfamiliar to Sophia, his words echoing through the chapel as if carried by unseen forces. Alaric's piercing gaze never left her, his presence both reassuring and unnerving. When the final words were spoken, a chill swept through the air, extinguishing several candles. It felt less like a wedding and more like a pact sealed by something ancient and unyielding. Afterward, Alaric guided Sophia to a waiting carriage. Though the ride was silent, the tension between them was palpable. Sophia's thoughts churned. Why had he chosen her? What was the danger he had alluded to? The questions piled up, but she dared not voice them. Alaric, for his part, seemed lost in thought, his jaw clenched as he stared out the window at the moonlit countryside. When they arrived at Blackwood Manor, Sophia gasped. The estate was sprawling, its Gothic architecture both magnificent and foreboding. Gargoyles perched atop stone columns, their grotesque faces illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns lining the driveway. The carriage pulled to a stop, and a butler appeared, bowing deeply as he opened the door. Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood, he said, his voice steady but devoid of warmth. Sophia stepped out, her breath visible in the cool night air. Home, she repeated under her breath, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. Inside, the manor was even grander. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and ornate tapestries adorned the walls. The air carried the faint scent of aged wood and lavender. Servants moved silently, their heads bowed as they passed. Despite the opulence, the atmosphere was heavy, as though the manor itself bore witness to countless secrets. Alaric led her to a room at the end of a long corridor. He pushed open the double doors, revealing a lavish bedroom with a four-poster bed draped in crimson velvet. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. This will be your chamber, Alaric said, his tone formal. You'll find everything you need here. Sophia nodded, her eyes scanning the room. Thank you, she murmured. Rest well, he said, his expression softening slightly. Tomorrow, we will talk. With that, he left, the heavy doors closing behind him. Alone, Sophia sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. The reality of her situation began to sink in. She was no longer the poor seamstress from Everdale. She was Sophia Blackwood, wife to a man who seemed both savior and enigma. The following days were a whirlwind. Alaric kept his promise to explain, but his revelations only deepened the mystery. He spoke of ancient family traditions, alliances forged through generations, and a legacy that required him to marry someone with purity of spirit, a quality he claimed Sophia possessed. But why me? Sophia asked one evening as they sat in the manor's grand library. Shelves of leather-bound books towered around them, the air thick with the scent of parchment and ink. Alaric leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Because you're different," he said. "You have endured hardship without losing your kindness. That resilience is rare." Sophia's cheeks flushed at his words, but doubt lingered. She couldn't ignore the sense that there was more he wasn't telling her. One evening, curiosity got the better of her. As Alaric attended to business in the study, Sophia wandered the halls of the manor. She passed locked doors and corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly. Finally, she came upon a room that was slightly ajar. Inside, the glow of moonlight revealed a series of portraits lining the walls. Each depicted a member of the Blackwood family, their faces stern and eyes hauntingly lifelike. One portrait in particular caught her attention. It was of a woman, her features strikingly similar to Sophia's. Her heart raced as she stepped closer, reading the plaque beneath the painting, Isolde Blackwood, 1763. The creak of a floorboard startled her, and she turned to see Alaric standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be in here," he said quietly, though there was no anger in his tone. "Who was she?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alaric hesitated, then stepped into the room. "Isolde was my ancestor," he said. "She was remarkable. Much like you." Sophia's brow furrowed. "Why do I look like her?" Alaric's gaze softened, but his answer was evasive. "Some things are better left in the past." Frustrated but unwilling to press further, Sophia nodded and allowed him to lead her back to her chamber. That night, she lay awake, the image of Isolde's face etched into her mind. The resemblance was too uncanny to be a coincidence, and Sophia vowed to uncover the truth. The tension between Sophia and Alaric grew as more secrets came to light. She began noticing subtle signs of his duality, the way he could shift from warm and protective to cold and calculating in an instant. The servants' hushed whispers only deepened her suspicions. Words like curse and protection floated through the air, always silenced when Sophia entered the room. One fateful evening, as a storm raged outside, Sophia confronted Alaric in the study. "I deserve the truth," she demanded, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her. "What aren't you telling me?" Alaric's jaw tightened, and he rose from his chair, pacing before the fireplace. Finally, he stopped, turning to face her. "The Blackwood name carries a curse," he admitted, his voice heavy with resignation. "It is why I needed to marry someone like you. Your strength, your purity, it is the only way to break it." Sophia's breath caught. "A curse? What kind of curse?" "One that has bound my family for centuries," he said. "Every generation, a sacrifice must be made to keep the darkness at bay. I refuse to let it claim another." The room seemed to close in around her. Sophia's knees threatened to give way as the weight of his words settled over her. Her marriage to Alaric wasn't just about wealth or status. It was about survival, for him, for his family, and perhaps for herself. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Because I didn't want to burden you with this," he said, stepping closer. "But now you're a part of it, Sophia. Whether you like it or not, our fates are entwined." Sophia met his gaze, her resolve hardening. She had come to Blackwood Manor seeking a better life, but now she faced something far greater. Fear and uncertainty swirled within her, but she would not run. She would fight, not just for herself, but for the man who had risked everything to protect her. "Then we face it together," she said, her voice steady. For the first time, Alaric's cold facade cracked, and a flicker of hope lit his eyes. "Together," he agreed. The storm outside raged with an almost otherworldly fury as if nature itself reflected the turmoil within Blackwood Manor. Sophia stood in the grand hall, her pulse pounding as the truth about the Blackwood curse bore down on her. Alaric's revelations had been haunting, but what he hadn't told her was that the curse demanded its final act tonight. "You never intended to face this alone, did you?" Sophia accused, her voice trembling but firm. She stared at Alaric, who stood across from her, his features shadowed by the flickering candlelight. He didn't deny it. "I had hoped to shield you from this, Sophia," he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "But the curse binds us both now. If we don't act tonight, the darkness will claim everything." "Then tell me how we stop it," Sophia demanded. Alaric hesitated, the weight of centuries-old secrets pressing down on him. "The curse can only be broken if the heir willingly sacrifices their blood to the altar in the crypt," he said finally. "But the last attempt left the heir, corrupted. Twisted into something inhuman. I can't let that happen to you." "And if we do nothing?" Sophia asked, her voice quiet but resolute. "The darkness will consume us both," Alaric replied. "It will spread, destroying the manor, the land, and everyone tied to the Blackwood name." Sophia's chest tightened as the enormity of their situation became clear. She had not chosen this life, but fate had entwined her with it nonetheless. Yet, she could not ignore the faint glimmer of humanity in Alaric's eyes, the desperation that betrayed his cold facade. "Then we do it together," she said, stepping toward him. Her voice was steady, her determination unwavering. "This curse belongs to both of us now. If there's a price, we pay it as one." Alaric's eyes softened, and for a moment, the storm outside seemed to pause. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You don't have to do this." "But I will," she replied firmly. "Because you're not alone anymore." Guided by the dim light of torches, they descended into the crypt beneath the manor. The air grew colder with each step, the weight of centuries pressing down on them. At the heart of the crypt stood an ancient altar, its surface etched with arcane symbols that glowed faintly in the gloom. "This is it," Alaric said, his voice heavy with dread. As Sophia approached the altar, the room seemed to come alive. Shadows danced along the walls, and an ominous hum filled the air. Sophia reached for Alaric's hand, their fingers intertwining as they stood before the ancient stone. "What do we do?" she asked. Alaric produced a ceremonial dagger, its blade glinting in the torchlight. "We offer blood, willingly given," he said. "But we must do it together. The curse must see our unity." With a deep breath, Sophia held out her hand. Alaric's movements were slow and deliberate as he made a shallow cut on her palm, then his own. Their blood mingled as it dripped onto the altar, the glowing symbols flaring to life. A deafening roar filled the crypt, and the shadows coalesced into a monstrous form, the embodiment of the curse itself. Its eyes burned with malevolence as it loomed over them. "You think you can defy me?" the entity hissed, its voice echoing like 1,000 whispers. "We're not afraid of you," Sophia declared, stepping forward. "This ends now." The entity lunged, but Alaric pulled Sophia close, their joined hands raised toward the altar. The glowing symbols erupted into a blinding light, forcing the creature to retreat. A cry of rage tore through the crypt as the curse was drawn back into the altar, its form dissolving into nothingness. As silence fell, the light dimmed, leaving Sophia and Alaric standing in the stillness. Their hands remained clasped, bloodied but unbroken. "It's over," Alaric murmured, his voice filled with awe and relief. Sophia looked up at him, her face pale but determined. "No," she said softly. "It's just the beginning." The morning after the storm, Blackwood Manor felt different. The oppressive heaviness that had lingered for centuries was gone, replaced by an almost palpable lightness. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating every corner of the grand estate as if welcoming a new chapter. Sophia stood in the manor's vast garden, the gentle breeze brushing against her face. The air smelled of blooming jasmine, a scent she had not noticed before. Alaric joined her, his expression unguarded for the first time. He looked at peace, though a hint of weariness lingered in his eyes. "It's strange, isn't it?" Sophia said, glancing at him. "To think it's finally over." Alaric nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've carried the weight of that curse my entire life," he said. "To be free of it, it feels unreal. But it's because of you, Sophia. I could never have faced it alone." She smiled softly. "We faced it together. That's what matters." For the next few weeks, life at Blackwood Manor slowly transformed. The staff, no longer bound by the fear of the curse, began to smile more freely. Laughter echoed through the halls, and the manor became a place of warmth and renewal rather than secrets and shadows. Sophia took on a new role as the lady of the house, though she approached it with humility and grace. She insisted on getting to know each member of the staff personally, learning their names and stories. Her kindness and genuine interest won their loyalty, and soon, they adored her as much as they respected her. One day, as Sophia tended to the garden, she found Alaric watching her from the veranda. He had taken to observing her often as if trying to commit every moment to memory. "You're staring again," she teased, brushing dirt from her hands. "Can you blame me?" he replied with a faint smile, descending the steps to join her. "You've brought life back to this place, Sophia. To me." Her cheeks flushed as she looked up at him. "It's not just me," she said. "You chose to change. To let go of the past." Alaric reached for her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I never forget what you've done for me. For us." Their bond deepened with each passing day, rooted in trust and the trials they had overcome together. The echoes of the curse no longer haunted them, but the experience had left its mark in other ways. It had shown them both the strength they possessed and the resilience that came from standing united. Months later, Blackwood Manor opened its gates to the people of Everdale. Sophia had insisted on hosting a festival, a gesture of gratitude to the village where she had grown up. The gardens bloomed with life, and the villagers marveled at the transformation of the once dreaded estate. "You've done something incredible here," Alaric said as he stood beside Sophia, watching children play beneath the sprawling oaks. "Blackwood Manor is no longer a place of fear." Sophia's smile was radiant. "That's because it's no longer a place of secrets. We've given it a new story. One of hope." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Alaric turned to Sophia. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," he said, his tone uncharacteristically nervous. Sophia raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Oh. And what's that?" Taking a deep breath, Alaric dropped to one knee, holding her hand firmly in his. "Sophia, our marriage began as a necessity, but it has become so much more. You've shown me what it means to truly live, to love without fear. I know we've already stood at the altar, but this time, I want to ask you properly." He pulled out a small velvet box, revealing a simple but stunning ring. "Will you marry me, Sophia? Not because of duty or circumstance, but because I love you." Tears filled her eyes as she knelt beside him. "Yes, Alaric. 1,000 times, yes." The crowd erupted into cheers as Alaric slipped the ring onto her finger. They embraced, the future ahead of them brighter than they could have ever imagined. Blackwood Manor, once a place of darkness, was now a beacon of love and renewal. And for Sophia and Alaric, it was not only their home but the foundation of a life built on trust, courage, and unwavering devotion.